Divine Rise, Grand Rising. Blessed be to your day. May it be everything you require to create everything that you desire. In order to win the day, in order to become the day, in order to become the day, one must first understand the night before. In order to win the day, one must understand the night before. The dark. The badges of dishonor. The things that we hold on to and really start questioning things that we hold on to set the tone of where we're at. I got some questions. Got some questions. Got some questions. I'ma pull them. I remember for myself, I remember that at a point in time in my life where I thought a lot of the things that I held on to, I was holding on to dear life. I was holding on to life. I was good at being reactive. That's what I had to accept. That's what a lot of us have to accept. You are good at being reactive. You are very good at being reactive. You're good at being reactive. You're good at being reactive. You're good at maintaining that behavior. You're good at that one point, and you're good at that one aspect. But in order for you to truly tap into the night before, your darkness, in order for you to really do your work, tapping into your shadows and really doing this work, I had to learn that the very weight wasn't always in what I was searching for. I had to allow myself to really go into some of these moments. One of the biggest moments for me was the first time I was told no. Something as simple. It can be something as simple as a grain of salt that we don't really think about because we don't think about how insignificant it is at a certain point in time. But it was the first time I was told no. It wasn't the no that my mother told me. It wasn't the no that my mother told me, or wasn't the no that my pops told me. That was just the seed. That was just the seed. It was the conversation that I overheard them having afterwards to me being told no. That's what sparked it. That's what put that spark in there. It wasn't the fact that my mother had told me no, that I couldn't have something. It wasn't the fact that my mother told me that I couldn't have something. It was the conversation that I overheard beforehand, and in the conversation that I heard afterwards. My mother had told me no. My mother had told me no, that I can't have, I think it was like some cookies or some shit. My mom, she said, no, you can't have, no, you can't have them cookies right now. The conversation that I overheard later that night when I went down there when I snuck down there to go get those cookies, because I was going to get my cookies. The conversation that I overheard my mother and my mom and my pops having is what sparked my continued sparked some of the most detrimental points in my growth. They were talking about my mom and my pops. They were having an argument. They were having a whole conversation. And they were talking about my pops was mad at my mom's or upset with my mom's because my mom went and opened up like this credit account with JCPenney's at the time. She opened up a big ass credit account with JCPenney's, and she racked up, it was like around Christmas time, and she racked up like thousands of dollars on this credit limit on this card. Thousands of dollars. And I remember my pops was like, so how are we going to pay this? And my pops kept asking my mother, how are you going to pay that? How are we going to pay off this $1,000 credit card that you ran up at JCPenney's trying to give all the kids everything that they wanted? And my mom was just silent. She didn't say anything back. She was like, I can get it handled. She was like, I don't work that many hours in a week for you to sit here and just do this. So this conversation was detrimental. Because just before that, I remember asking before I went to bed for them damn cookies. I remember asking for them damn cookies. So I woke up around 3 or 4 o'clock. Didn't realize I was waking up around 3 or 4 to hear this conversation about why not. So that conversation, I didn't know, seeded the no that my mother told me. The no that my mother told me before I went to bed was seeded and fertilized by me hearing the conversation or the argument between my mom and my pops. I didn't realize it. I didn't notice it until later on down the line around Christmas. I was reactive. Later on around Christmas, I was reactive. Doing as a normal child would do, I was reactive. So Christmas came around that time. Christmas came around. All the gifts is under the tree. We all sitting in there opening up gifts. We all sitting in there waiting for the gifts to get passed around, opening up gifts. And I'm sitting in the corner. And I'm looking at the smile on my mom's face. But it was like, it wasn't really a smile. It was like, it was a broken smile on my mom's face. And I'm looking at the look on my pop's face. And I didn't know what disgust was. I didn't know what anger was. I was like 4 or 5. I didn't really know what it was. So I'm looking at their faces and I'm trying to enjoy opening up these gifts, but I couldn't enjoy it because I heard the conversation that led to these gifts. I heard the conversation that led up to this day. I heard that conversation. That conversation was rooted in my subconscious. So in my mind, I was like, can I really enjoy these gifts knowing this? I never dealt with it. One of the many layers. This is what happens to a lot of us when it comes into dealing with our night before. Dealing with our shadows. This is what a layer is in not dealing with your shadows. Not dealing with that work. A lot of them scars that you have and why they're there and why they're present. A lot of the reasons why you're in the behavior that you're in and you're acting out the way that you act is based on sometimes one of the most simplest scars that we don't want to go look at. We don't want to deal with. Layered on top of this are the other scars or the other wounds that layer on top of this. But since we're not getting to since we're so these deep wounds that we think are deep, we don't understand what made the first cut. We don't understand what made the first cut. These are the badges of dishonor that we carry. These are the scars on our soul that we carry. And we carry them on and on and on. The reason why you saw your father running around with multiple women, getting lost in multiple women. So now in your life, you find yourself trying to find yourself in multiple women, or trying to find your father in multiple men. The catalyst to where you're at now. This cycle that we carry on. You had a conversation with your mother, and how many times have we heard, this is one of those most simple scars we really don't think about. How many times did you hear your mother say, when you're grown and you have your own house and you have your own kids, you can make your own rules? When you are grown, when you have your own crib, when you have your kids, you can make the rules. Until then, I'm grown, I pay the bills, and as long as you here, you pay attention to the rules in my house. Sounds simple. It sounds simple, don't it? It sounds simple. It don't sound like something that can really do some damage. But you carried that on. Going unadjusted with that, you carried it on. I remember one time my mother said that to me. And I literally said to my mom, like, you don't pay the bills. You don't pay the bills. Dad does. You don't pay the bills. Dad does. You don't pay the bills. Dad does. Dad goes to work and brings the money in the house. You don't pay the bills. Looking at my mother's response, kept going further and deeper in, not realizing that was my first state of reaction. That was my first time reacting to a situation. That was my first of many times that I reacted in a conversation or in an argument in order to win the argument. That was my first win. I was 14, 15 years old. That was my first win ever. That was my first win. That was my first identity. That was one of the first identities that I created. So I'm sitting there in that space and I have that argument and I say that, and my mother shuts down. My mother shut down plenty of times before. Where did I learn how to shut somebody down? I learned it from every time my pops would have that same conversation or say those things. I learned what got shut down. I learned how to shut my mother down. My mother was quiet for like the next 2 weeks. My mother gave me anything that I wanted for the next 2 weeks. If I wanted to go outside and stay outside longer, my mother let me go outside. If I wanted Capri Suns and cookies and whatever I wanted, My mother let me get whatever I wanted. But I didn't know that that was one of the first identities that I created. That was one of the first badges that I gained. So I sat in it and I used it. As I learned that, and it worked from that space, I learned how to use that in my environment. That was one of the first identities that I created. A lot of the times, we don't understand that the first identities that we create, some of the first things that we create are going to be based off those first arguments that we heard. That argument that I won, that shutting down my mother at that point in time, that came from when I was 6 years old, when I first heard the first argument between my mom and pops talking about finances. That was the first argument that I heard. I heard my pop say that shit all the fucking time about money. 5 years old, hearing that over and over and over again. So then I carried that forward, and I didn't release that bullet. Or take that knife and go cut into my mother's wound until I was about 13 years old to say that over again. When I learned that behavior, I mastered that behavior, I kept using that behavior. It seemed so natural to me. It seems so natural for me to be really, really cutthroat. It sounds so natural for me to be really cold and really calculating with my approach in dealing with people. It sounded really, really easy. But I didn't know that conversation between my mom and my pops that I overheard, that wasn't where I got it from. Why it was so easy for me to take that blade and use it. It was based on something that one of my past life cycles. It was based on a past life. This is the aspects of you getting deep inside of yourself. It's not just what you doing right now. When I talk about really accepting what you have to accept, it's all of it. It's not just some of it. It's just not what happened to you in this cycle. It's understanding that what happened to you in this cycle is an effect based on a cause from another cycle. A lot of us are still wheeling from them no's. That first no that you ever heard from your mother was only because for some of you, your mother, the first no your mother told you was based on the first no her father told her mother, and her mother heard from her grandfather, all based in an argument. And that energy is what's been cycled through for her to say that no, that behavior. Remember earlier in the week I talked about that behavior cements the timeline. That's that inheritance. That behavior cements the time. That behavior cements that emotion in that timeline. That's why I kept saying emotional intelligence or emotional literacy is the forefront, or what you need to understand before you can have that financial literacy. It's synonymous with financial literacy. Financial literacy is the byproduct of emotional literacy. Because I didn't have emotional literacy, or the emotional literacy that I gained, was that my mom didn't pay any bills. My pops went and made all the money. So I can set that tone, and that can be the shut up point. That's how I can cash in on that account. I was learning how to cash in on that account. So that became my narrative in the relationships that I went in forward with. When I didn't feel like I didn't have enough bread, then I would get really argumentative. I would get dismissive. I would get really dismissive in the conversation because I was not at where I thought I needed to be at. But the first thing that I needed to realize was I wasn't where I needed to be at when I went into that space. what I took into that space is what I had to face. So when I went into that space based on I have the job, I got the car, I got the crib, I got the clothes, I got this money, but with no emotional literacy with myself, that's all I had when I went into the space. The only way that I could create having the car, having the house, having the things that I had, the only way that I can maintain those things in that new causation in that new cause was maintaining the old effects. So I had to maintain the old effect. So the effect that I was feeding from was that wound from that conversation that I had, that conversation that I overheard when I was 5, 6 years old, that first argument that I heard my mom and my pops go through. That was the original effect. That was the basis of one of my original wounds. Until I addressed that wound, I wasn't doing anything. This is what happens a lot of times as we moving forward when we're doing this work. Why we seem to be so good at a certain aspect in our life. Why we seem to be so good in escaping and coping, but when it really comes time to healing, we ain't got no idea. But it's okay. That's what I'm here to give you. The emotional high, whenever you're in that high state of emotion, you feeling really, really emotional, you oversharing, you in this state of oversharing, you're overcompensating for something that you didn't receive. Because every time you do something in over, you're trying to receive something. Every time you have something in the lower, you're trying to receive something. It's only in that middle point where you actually can start doing your healing. So when you going into a space, and I talked about this on last Friday's lecture, so up down on the channel, I talked about the difference between that emotional attachment and that emotional projection, and understanding the aspects of really working inside of your truth of yourself, that healed aspect of yourself. A lot of us like to stay in the unhealed aspects, the wounded masculine, the wounded feminine, and then guess what it creates? It creates a ripple effect. It creates the ripple effect. Some people are really upset about not being accepted by their mother. So ever since then, they put the blame on everybody else for not being accepted by their mother. And I'm not just talking about men, I'm talking about women as well. You weren't accepted by your mother. Or you felt that you were not accepted by your mother, but you twisted it because your father didn't accept your mother, or your father wasn't around. So now you've been trying the last 10 years of your life, trying to prove to your mom that all you have to do is go get the bag. All you had to do was listen. All you had to do was submit. But you weren't submitting. You were dismissing the lessons that you needed to learn. When it comes to this aspect, we don't get into this on Friday, that submission to the soul, true submitting, actually submitting to the attributes of the ideal. Submitting to those attributes of the ideal. It's in order to learn, not to avoid. A lot of us put ourselves in positions because we're trying to escape from something that we haven't dealt with, but we keep carrying that shit forward. You keep carrying that shit into your current state of being. You just keep carrying it on. You keep carrying the same scar, the same wound, the same thing, and you keep saying the same thing, but you're not understanding. You're not really listening to what you're saying. You're hearing what you're saying because you're trying to be right, but you're not listening to what you're saying. You walking around talking about, "Ooh, I got that wet ass, you got that wet ass box." But that wet ass box that you got, that weak ass pullout game that you got, those are tears from your inner child coming out every time you go into a space. You dumping the tears of your inner child into people. You putting your inner child's tears on that nigga face. Cause you don't understand what the fuck it is. That trick that you learned is only a coping mechanism based on it's a trauma response or a coping mechanism from the first time that you actually learned. Where did you learn that trick from? How many of y'all gonna actually start admitting like, yo, I learned that trick in response to that event that happened when I was being when I was being babysat. This is understanding the dark aspects of yourself. It's deeper than just saying or stating into that space looking for another excuse. You stuck in the excuse in your current state, or you're still stuck in that past narrative, so you're trying to build that future, but you don't understand that your future only can be built in your now. And this is what I've said this before in many lectures. Whenever it's time for you to do your work, and you're accepting that I'm time for me to dive into my work, you got to accept that you benefited from the trauma. You benefited from the no. You benefited from that first event. I benefited from the traumatic experience. The way that my mother did before me, and my grandfather did before me, and my mother and my aunt and my family did before me. Because until you acknowledge that, you're not going to be able, when you start doing your work, you're going to keep trying to go back over there. There's two different ways of going back over there. Every time you go over there and you do not acknowledge the family wounds or the wounds that will happen, and you don't acknowledge them, you only carry in the curse on forward. It's even worse if you have, it's even more of a detriment if you have children. It's even more of a detriment if you have kids. You sitting there with that, you carrying that weight on your shoulder. You carrying that weight on your shoulder. You carrying that suicide vest on your shoulder. And that's all your child sees. So your child learns how to react based on that. The man in your life learns how to react based on that. The woman in your life is learning how to react on that. Because both of y'all are in a state of escape. You just keep escaping. You ain't taking that time for yourself. You ain't coming into that alone time. You're not learning anything inside of that alone time. Even when you're taking on that alone time, it's based on the same coping mechanism and escape. I can do bad. I can do it all by myself. I remember telling myself, ooh, I can do it all by myself. As long as I got the car, the house, the job. But then I noticed that every time that I was in a space where I thought I was at peace, I was actually stagnant. A lot of us keep confusing peace with being stagnant. When you are in peace, there is no limits to your growth. When you are in stagnant, when you are in the space of stagnant, when the chaos uproots, when the chaos comes through, that shit fuck up your whole life. You don't know how to deal with it. That's how you get instead of you being triggered like, oh my God, every time I'm at peace, you weren't at peace, sis. You weren't at peace, bruh. You were stagnant. You got comfortable. It's okay. That's what that chaos keep doing. It keeps showing you what you need to, it keeps showing you the work you need to do. You made that acknowledgement that you was team dark side. So now every one of your demons, your Damians, the things that you have not learned are coming out to play on the surface. That's what's happening. Now that this veil is gone, and we don't get deep into that veil on Friday, but now that that veil is gone, it's time to, all you have is your shadows you got to deal with. That's all you've ever had to deal with. Now they right there in your face. But you keep trying to, if you keep trying to move forward the way, if you keep trying to move forward the way that you once moved forward, that got you the way you at right now, it's only going to repeat shit. It's only going to be based on reaction. It's only based on escape. is not really based in peace. It's based on you being stagnant. It's based on you maintaining the external. As long as I got my job, I'm okay. As long as I got this and this, I'm okay. Hell, half of the times when you are actually in a space that's actually bringing you peace, because you are not used to true peace, that means that true vulnerability that's inside of peace, you keep individuals around you that are not at peace with themselves. You'll keep motherfuckers around you that are not at peace with themselves. I remember keeping people around me when I thought I was in a state of peace. That means when I was in a relationship and the relationship was going really, really, really good. Really, really good. The relationship going great. I'm learning things. I'm expanding my horizons. I'm eating different food. I'm in a whole different mindset. But since I was not used to true peace, since I was not willing to become truly vulnerable, I was only used to going through a certain emotional projection. I kept people around me, or the individuals that kept coming around me, they weren't at peace. They weren't at peace. They didn't understand what self-care was. They didn't know what love was. They were still going from their emotional wounds. So they would project those aspects onto me. And I accepted it because I didn't want to be vulnerable. Anything to keep me in this state of being balanced. I was trying to, because you always trying to find balance. You always trying to find that balance. But I was trying to find that balance in the negative. So I kept people around me. I had friends around me that were doing all types of wild ass shit. And then I was sitting there like, that's not me though. But it was me. I was vicariously living through them. That's because I wasn't doing it. Because every time I was asked, so why do you hang around them niggas if them niggas ain't doing shit with their life? Why you hang around them? And I always gave out the same excuse. Because I grew up with them. They know some things about me. They know things about me. But then I wasn't listening to my conversation when I was saying it. I was saying that they knew things about me. But to finish that statement of honoring my thought, I felt that if I was not around them, then they could share that information. They can use it against me. Why? Because it went all the way back to that original wound of when I was 5 years old, and I heard that first argument between my mom and my pops. And I remember the first time I used that shot against my mom when I was 13. And then I carried it on. That was the result. A lot of us like to put our events and the things that happen to us in our lives, and we automatically think, based on the antagonist program that we put into our subconscious, that it's somebody else that did it. It's the reason of somebody else. It's not always the reason that somebody else did it. Even if it is, whether it's the reason that somebody else initiated that traumatic event or you did it, it got to be dealt with. You got a choice. It got to be dealt with. One of the deepest things that I had to learn was like, yo, that had to be dealt with. That's where all the weight was. That's why I could, simple things, because it's always something simple. Simple things to why I couldn't lose weight. Simple things to why my hair wouldn't grow. Simple things to why I couldn't enunciate. Simple things to why I couldn't have conversations. Simple things to why I couldn't last in relationships. Simple things to why I was always sequestering to my urges. Simple shit. The simplest answer was right there in front of me. But since I didn't want to step out of that light, since I didn't want to go into that darkness, I didn't want to deal with it. Since I didn't want to accept, couldn't deal with it. Since I didn't want to release, didn't want to deal with it. Because it gave me an identity. It gave me my identities. It gave me my 76 demons. It gave me my demons. It gave me my conspirators of my setting. They were the conspirators of my set. It gave me those. Every time that I started doing my works, I wondered why every time I did work, instead of me getting the good goddess to help me flourish, I got the bad sister. Every time that I was trying to deal with one energy, I kept getting the other energy because it was feeding off of my insecurity. It was something that I needed to deal with. This is the depths of your work. Before I get out of here, the example. I'm gonna ask 6 questions. I'm gonna ask 6 questions. What do you need to accept? What do you need to accept? What do you need to accept? This is the opportunity. This is your opportunity. You need to accept the opportunity. You always in the position that you need to be in. You always in the space that you need to be in. This is your opportunity. What is your opportunity? What do you need to learn? What is it time to release? It's time to release from, through that 9 of Wands aspect, the 9 of Swords, you holding yourself accountable to all these scars. You holding your head down and you keep getting hit by the same scars. It's an opportunity to face these aspects, the things that are cutting you short. This is your opportunity. It's the end of that cycle. What are you going to do? Keep going back through it? I've told you about those cycles before. I've told you about those cycles. Whenever you're at a high state of emotion, it's the end of a cycle. Whenever you're at the lowest point of emotion, that means you're feeling real numb, it's the end of a cycle. It's only until you acknowledge that you need to get back to that middle point that you're going to address and move out of that cycle. What do you need to release from? That everything that you possess right now at this point in time is based on you remaining stagnant. Everything that you holding on to right now is based on you remaining stagnant. It's not bringing you peace. You holding on to the same ideas. You holding on to the same conduits. You staying holding on to the same external narrative. You still trying to do the same things. You still trying to hold on to that same narrative. Yo, no. You gotta let go of that possession. You gotta let go of it. It's time to let go. That's what you need to release. What you about to learn is true balance. But you can't have that balance if you got this on one end. You trying to hold on to those possessions, and those possessions are what's holding up your damn wounds. As long as you holding on to these possessions based on trying to stay stagnant and not grow, you gonna stay. These are gonna be staying at the forefront up high. That's what they feeding from. Your imbalances are feeding like this, in this staircase. What are you about to learn? Where you gonna find that healing and recovery? In that good old 8 of Pentacles, which represents building, which represents going into that darkness, which represents going to collect your lessons. It's time to go collect those lessons. And where you gonna find that help at? In that inner strength. It's always been on the internal aspect. Nothing outside of you is going to be stronger than you. I've said that many times before. Nothing outside of you is going to give you more than you're willing to give into yourself. Nothing is going to give you more than you're willing to give into yourself. At all. One of the things that I had to learn of, one of the most possessive traits that I had was that conversation. And that was just one of the many avenues that I had to go traveling in order to get into just to get to the door of my inner child, just to get to the door of where I left my inner child at. I was so blaming everybody else, but I left them there too. You blaming everybody else for your situation, but your inner child, you left them back there as well. They keep trying to come up. They keep trying to say stuff. They keep getting attention. But since you ain't used to it, it feel like a threat. It feel like, oh my God, it might be something wrong. It's coming at too high of a price. It's the price of your soul. I want you to be the best. I desire you to be the fucking best. I desire you to be the best. This that ownership mentality. This week's episode of the God Hour podcast is out now. We got into breaking that broken record. That song you keep trying to spin that keep losing value. This Friday, we're getting into Pluto Rising. Pluto Rising. I love that title, Submitting to the Soul. This is a part 2, official part 2, The Dark Night of the Soul. I desire you to be the best. I desire you to be the best and break all of these limitations. I desire you to break yourself out of them rings that you keep getting yourself stuck into. And it's okay. That's what I'm here for. Everything from the readings to setting up that shadow work consultation. Inbox me or hit me up at GodaCoAlchemistLLC.com. Share the video if you know somebody that need it. I'll see y'all on Friday and I'll see y'all throughout the week. I love you. We love us. Ashe.